Hey everybody, Cindy Daychuk with Queen Bee Creations coming at you. I know it's been almost an entire week since we were last working on this Jacobean cabinet together. My apologies. I had the weirdest thing happen and my back just totally seized up and yeah, it's not 100%, but I'm the impatient type. So what I have been doing is slowly working on this piece in little bursts of speed. My back's not quite up to being able to handle sanding and waxing all in one go. There's a lot of core that goes into that. But I, one, don't want to leave this hanging, and I don't want to leave you hanging, and I got other projects I want to move on to as well. So what has been happening up until now, if you haven't seen the first three parts of this cabinet, we have certainly put on our base coat, which was plain white. We then layered on multiple other colors in soft tones, kind of a sandy blonde. We did a really pale mauve, a little pale green. And I tried to give you a couple of close-up pics. So go back and check in the Facebook feed under Queen Bee Creations to be able to see some of that. Because I started out by telling you that from a distance, this piece is going to look gray. So it's going to seem like a very neutral piece in the home. But up close, it's going to have a lot of unique differences, a lot of characters. So when you get closer to it, you start seeing a lot of the distressing, but you also start seeing a lot of those other colors highlighted. And what it does is add a lot more character to the piece than you would get if you were just painting all in a solid color. It gives it a lot more subtle dimension. It gives almost this kind of a pastel glow that comes through some of the gray color every so often. So I took a couple of quick close-up pics and posted them so that you could see a little bit of what I'm seeing. But here's a little bit of the trick to this. You cannot be an aggressive sander to be able to get this look. One of the reasons that we did a color wash of the pale gray rather than a solid straight out of the can gray was so that we could move through that gray layer a little bit easier and without as much heavy-handedness as if we were doing a regular distressing. And so we have to sand fairly lightly. And this means that I want you to be using a fairly, I'm using a 320 grit, an extra fine sandpaper. And this is one of my new favorite sandpapers ever because it doesn't crack and it allows me to bend into corners and things without ripping apart. So it's a Norton Pro Sand, just trying it out. I heard some good things about it. And right now I'm thinking it's kind of awesome. But what we want to do, and I'm just looking for some of my sanding blocks, is a really, really light sanding. Now, you see the color tone difference between the lower cabinet and the upper. This has been sanded and it's been waxed. So I had just done the waxing on that and took a quick pic. So you'll see some of that scroll work in one of the pictures that I posted on the site. So you can see close up that you're getting some of the shadings of the sandy blonde, a little bit of the green. The pale mauve comes through in spots, but it seems almost more like it's kind of glowing. It's a softer look to the piece, which I'm loving. I'm really digging this. So what I have not done, I've sanded over on this side, but I haven't waxed it yet. But I haven't sanded these. And I wanted you to kind of be here with me to be able to see a little bit of it. I've got two pieces. I've got a little piece of my 320 grit. And I have this really old and worn sanding block. So as much as it had a much, lower grit on there, it actually is really worn down. So it's just got enough to help me take off a little bit of the top coat on these things. Now, it's going to be a little noisy, but all we're doing is we're slowly taking off that gray top coat that I added on. And what it's going to do is not only slowly reveal some of the layers, but it's also going to smooth this out. So I got to tell you, the rest of this piece, where I've been waxing it, is like butter smooth. Now, I still have to buff. I want it to dry a little bit. I have to buff. And I have to consider whether I want to start adding a little bit of dark wax to it as well. But for now, you want to be able to get down into here, smooth out some of these areas. And we want to be able to reveal some of the layers below. Now, before you all yell at me, I know I'm not wearing a mask. One, for using the DIY paint, it's not a harmful paint, so I'm not killing myself. I am, however, breathing in some of those little powdery particles. So, you know, when you go to blow your nose, remember you did this, but I'm doing it so that you can still hear me. And that's one of the reasons I'm only sanding a little piece of this. Plus, I tend to use a little shop vac, a little handheld Dirt Devil shop vac, as I go to be able to suck up all of the dust so it's not totally crazy in here. And because it tends to puddle. So that's one of the reasons that I didn't. This lower piece I did not wax, even though I've sanded it off already, but I didn't want all of this dust to be sticking to my wax. But this Dirt Devil, super loud. So on a live, you would not appreciate me doing that. If you think the sanding is loud, you don't want to hear that vacuum going. So as much as this seems like I may be pressing hard, and what I am doing is feeling as I go, because as soon as it feels smooth, I know that I've taken off just that knocked off that top little rough layer of the gray. So there's not tons of gray left. So as soon as I've got it, so it's that buttery smoothness, now I want to switch to my really light sandpaper, and I just want to be a little bit more strategic about some of the areas, and I'm looking for some of the color as I go. So I'm starting to see some of the sanding blonde here, right in here, and I know you guys can't see it, but I'm starting to see a little bit of that mauve coming through. So I want to highlight some of those different colors and just be able to see kind of where some of them are coming through. And because this bends and curves, it allows me to get down into a lot of those grooves in between some of the details, right? Especially on a piece like this, where you have tons of detail. My living room's not going to thank me for the blowing. Okay, I'm going to get rid of a little bit of this dust down in the crevices. So I wanted to come on, give you an idea of how this works in terms of revealing a few of those layers. Really now it's kind of the detail of keeping an eye out for them. I want to balance it off a little bit with my other panel over on the other side. But it's kind of, I'm looking for the echoes of the color. You know, it's when it's in this form, they're not as, I'm going to say dramatic, even though it's a very subtle kind of drama. But they're still a little bit more faint. When we wax it, it brings out a lot more of that detail. So because we're not going for something bold, and we'll do bold pieces in the future, trust me, but because we're going for something that's a little bit more subtle, that's definitely looking a little bit more aged, we want to be a little bit selective about some of the colors that we're pulling out, where they might be hiding, because you were with me. There was no rhyme or reason to where I was putting some of this color. It was very organic in terms of being all over. But I want to be able to bring out a few of those. And where I've got a couple of rough edges, I want to smooth those out. So this feels awesome. So right now, that's feeling super smooth, nice and buttery soft. It's got a lot of the character showing, which is what I'm looking for. Okay, and I'm going to carry on with this after the live, just so you don't have to listen to me constantly sanding here. But I wanted to show you a little bit of the waxing, and I've got all kinds of items sitting down in the ground behind me that are waiting to see what I'm going to do next. So sometimes I don't know. I have different ideas of where it could go, but I want to be able to see the piece next. I do have some dark wax, and I'm thinking I'm likely to be able to use some of that. And if not the dark wax, maybe a little bit of an aging patina look, but that's going to be added in a lot of the details. I am using, because this is what I have on hand, and like I said, I mix brands all the time depending upon what I have in my studio and what's available. I've got some Annie Sloan clear wax, and just a tiny little wax brush. I have some bigger wax brushes, but right now my back is liking the smaller one, the smaller movement. And I'm just adding a bit on here. There's not a lot. You can see that it's not very much. But I need that wax brush to be able to push it into all of those crevices. And you can see how far just that little bit of wax goes. The more you spread it with your brush, the better. The less that we are having to try and move that wax later after it's dried. So we want to be able to get as much coverage as possible from that wax right up front, so that we're not having to, one, waste product and take tons of it off. But once it dries and you go into the buffing, you don't want to have really thick layers of that wax. Better to buff and add more if you decided that you wanted it, right? But you can see how that wax starts to bring out and highlight that panel, how it starts to give a little bit more depth. Now, because we were using the DIY paint, which is that clay-based paint, right? And I said that water would reactivate it. The wax, as well as adding a little bit of moisture into it. So you can see how it immediately darkens. This above is almost dry. So you can see that it'll lighten up slightly, but not a lot. So it really pulls out the richness of those colors. So when it was dry, and I couldn't see some of the contrast here, and I'll take a pic of this panel and post it afterwards so you can see what we just did together close up on the site. Close up, I can see that we've got all the pink tones here, and here's a bit of the green, some more of that mauvey pink in here, some of the sandy blonde down the sides. So I'm getting all of those colors that are popping through. From a distance, overall, people are going to think it's a big gray cabinet. But as you get closer, you start to see all the phenomenal detail that's in the piece. You see the aging, and it starts to get that worn and kind of weathered look, which is what we were after with this piece. Or at least it was what I was after with this piece. So, you know, if I painted it just that solid gray, it wouldn't have that aged character. Even if I had distressed it, it wouldn't be the same as having some of these fine layers of paint in it. And more so than if I had painted the white over the entire piece, and then I painted the sandy blonde over the whole piece, and then I painted the pink, and then I painted the green. One, that's a heck of a lot of layers to get down through to be able to reveal one, but you wouldn't have the kind of soft variation that we're getting that you can see in some of those close-up pics. So I'm going to carry on and finish sanding out this last cabinet door, finish putting a little bit of the wax on it and let it dry so that I can get to the buffing. Now, because the buffing would be noisy too, and I think you get an idea of what it is, I will share with you. When I'm doing a lot of flat buffing, I start out with this baby. So this is a Simonized. Thank you for that. That's my husband correcting me on the tool name. But it's a Simonized, I think it was like for a car buffing?
Yeah.
Okay, so car buffing. And you can use this. It's great for the flats. Now, obviously, it's honkingly huge. So it's not good for the small areas and small crevices. I have seen people take their drills and add an extended pad onto that and be able to use that to get into some of those areas to be able to buff. But I also do a lot of hand buffing. So I always have a buffing brush. This one is a Madeline, right? That I got from my Annie Sloan store. I am working up to perhaps getting the big Buffy brush from DIY. I kind of lust after that brush, so all painters out there, you'll know what I'm saying about lusting after a brush. But I also use claws. I use rags. And my favorite are, rather than throwing out old t-shirts, I cut them up. And I use those for applying stain and wax. I use them for buffing. This is the sleeve off of a long sleeve t-shirt, and I will be using that around some of these upper posts to be able to, and it's great for spindles and legs of things. So I use a variety of things to be able to get it buffed smooth, but that I will be doing before we go live together again. And then I will have decided on some of the other aging products that I want to use, and we'll do some of that detail work together. So you see, again, a little bit more of how I get some of that detail. Thanks for joining me today. It was quick, but this is about the length of time my back can hold up right now. It is what it is, but we're going to carry through. I'm definitely on the mend, though, so thank you for all your good wishes. Anybody with chronic back pain, man, you have my deepest sympathies, because I know mine's going away, but I am not looking forward to this ever repeating itself for whatever reason it started in the first place. So, man, if you deal with this all the time, my heart goes out to you. Thanks for joining me. Cindy Daychuk with Queen Bee Creations, and I look forward to seeing you very soon for the next stage of this. Take care.